Have you ever learned the truth and regretted it? Yes, I found out. That's my answer to your question. When I realized my wife was living a double life, I broke. I took a rope. I went into the garage. I planned everything down to the minute. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It felt calm, honestly, like I was finally giving up trying to matter in a life where I clearly didn't. I'm 35. We've been together almost 8 years. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it felt like ours. Inside jokes, lazy Sundays, saving up for a house, getting a dog. We lived in Salt Lake City. We fought about dishes and DoorDash. We made up. We carried on. And then one day I realized I was just one part of her life, not the main part, not even the real one. I didn't go through with it. I'm not sure why. Maybe because the dog started whining outside the garage. Maybe because some tiny piece of me still hoped someone would care enough to ask what the hell happened. It started with harmless details. The kind you brush off because you don't want to look paranoid. A second phone charger she kept in her car. New clothes she said were just clearance stuff, but I never saw the receipts. Work trips. That seemed a little too frequent for an HR director in a mid-size firm. She got distant. Not angry. Just gone. We'd sit on the couch, and it felt like she wasn't there. She'd smile at something on her phone, then lock the screen before I could catch a glance. I asked if everything was okay. She said, "Yeah, just tired." Always tired. Always elsewhere. One day, she left her iPad unlocked on the kitchen counter. She was in the shower. I wasn't looking for anything, I swear, but a message popped up from someone saved as Maddie G. Except it wasn't Maddie. It was a man. And what he wrote made my skin go cold. I don't remember the exact words. What I remember is the feeling, like something heavy and cold dropped into my stomach. He said he missed her, that her scent was still on his sheets, that he still remembered her laugh while they drank wine in that room with the fireplace. The room with the fireplace. We'd never stayed anywhere like that. Not for our anniversary. Not ever. But he knew her too well. And she wasn't pushing him away. She was tender. And maybe guilty. But not regretful. I kept scrolling through their thread, feeling my legs go numb. There was a name. A photo. A video. They weren't just messing around. He called her his real life. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't an affair. She had a whole other life. And I wasn't part of it. I was her cover story. I know how that sounds. Creepy. Desperate. But after what I saw on her iPad, I needed the truth with my own eyes. So the next time she said she had a work trip in Boise, I said nothing. Just nodded and smiled. Then I took 2 days off and drove 6 hours behind her. I stayed 2 cars back. No music, no podcasts. Just the sound of the road and my heartbeat in my ears. She checked into a hotel. Not a business suite, just a quiet little inn off the highway. I waited. An hour later, a man pulled up. I recognized him immediately from the photos. She greeted him with a hug. Not casual. Not work friends. I watched them walk into the room together. That night I sat in my car in the parking lot for hours, engine off, staring at the windshield, wondering if I was even real anymore. Because if the life I built wasn't true, what does that make me? I drove home the next morning. Didn't cry. Didn't scream. Just silence, inside and out. I got back to our house, let the dog out, made coffee. I moved like a ghost. I didn't confront her. I didn't say a word. That night, she came home, kissed me on the cheek like she always did. I pretended to be half asleep. She showered, got into bed, scrolled through her phone. Just like every other night. Except now I knew everything. The next day, I wrote a note. It wasn't long, just enough for someone to know it wasn't their fault. I went to the garage, hung the rope, stood on the stool, and then I heard scratching. It was the dog, whining behind the door like he knew. Like he was saying, "Don't leave yet." I sat down, and for the first time in my life, I sobbed so hard I couldn't breathe. I didn't want to die. I just didn't know how to live with the version of me that stayed. I didn't tell anyone what happened in the garage. Not my friends. Not my brother. Not even her. I just existed. Until a week later, I walked into a coffee shop near my work, trying to feel normal, and the barista asked, "Hey man, you all right?" I looked up, confused. He said, "You've been coming here for 2 years. You used to smile." That hit harder than I expected. That night, I looked up therapists in my area, made an appointment, showed up, didn't say much in the first session, just sat there with my arms crossed, angry at myself for even being there. But the therapist said one thing that stuck. "You were betrayed, yes, but don't let you abandon yourself too." Something shifted after that. I wasn't okay, but I wanted to try. It had been almost a month. I'd gone to 3 therapy sessions. Still broken, but a little more awake. That morning, she made pancakes. She smiled like nothing was wrong. Like she wasn't living 2 lives while I was barely holding onto one. And I realized I couldn't keep pretending. Not for her. Not for anyone. I waited until she sat down with her coffee. And I said it as calmly as I could. "I know about Boise. I know about him. I know everything." She didn't speak. Her face just collapsed. Like she'd been bracing for this, but hoping it would never come. She asked, "How long have you known?" I said, "Long enough to try to hang myself in the garage." Her hand flew to her mouth. She whispered, "Oh my God." I didn't want comfort. I didn't want explanations. I just wanted the lie to stop. She cried. Not the performative kind. Real, messy, loud crying. She said she was sorry. That it wasn't about me. That she never meant to hurt me. That she thought she could keep both lives separate. She begged me to go to counseling. Said she'd cut him off. Said she'd change. But all I heard was, "Now that you caught me, I'm ready to pretend again." I asked her one thing. If I never said anything, how long would you have kept going? She didn't answer. That silence told me everything I needed to know. So I stood up, grabbed my keys, and before I walked out the door, I said, "I'm choosing me. For once." I moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment across town. No photos on the walls, no shared toothbrushes, no echo of a voice. It was the first time in years I could hear myself think, and I didn't always like what I heard. Being alone didn't feel like freedom at first. It felt like withdrawal. I missed the routine more than I missed her. The shared grocery lists. The Sunday laundry. But little by little, I started to breathe again. I went to therapy every week. Started walking more. Cooking for myself. Sitting with silence instead of trying to fill it. She emailed me a few times. Said she hoped I was okay. Said she was in therapy too. I didn't reply. Some days were easier. Some still weren't. But at least now, the life I was living was mine. It's been almost a year. I'm not healed. Not in the way people think healing works. But I'm grounded. I'm here. And that's more than I thought I'd ever be. People say time heals. It doesn't. Doing the work does. If you've ever been lied to, deeply, intimately, by someone who swore they loved you, I want you to hear this. It's not your fault for trusting. It's not weakness to break. And it's not failure to start over. What broke me wasn't just her betrayal. It was the version of myself I let disappear to keep someone else happy. And what saved me was finally choosing not to disappear anymore. Hi Reddit. I found out the truth, and I haven't known who I am since. Yeah, I found out. And honestly, I wish I hadn't. My father died a year ago. Heart attack. No warnings, no goodbyes. He was kind, serious, a little distant, but I always thought that was just who he was. Old school. Quiet love. At the funeral, I gave a speech. Talked about how he taught me not to be afraid of hard things. How he fixed my bike when I was 9. How we used to go fishing even though I always fell asleep in the boat. I said I wanted to be like him. I believed I knew who he was. 2 weeks after the funeral, I got a message from a woman I'd never seen before. There was a photo. He was in it, smiling, relaxed. But he wasn't with us. He was with another woman. With other kids. With a whole other family. At first, I thought it was fake. A scam. A mistake. Some weird grief trap. But then I saw the second photo. And the third. Same man. Same face. Different clothes. Different holidays. Different children. Teenagers. A boy who looked almost exactly like me when I was 14. A girl with my dad's eyes. The woman who messaged me said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know how else to tell you. I figured you deserved to know the truth." She wasn't aggressive. Not bitter. Just tired. Like she'd been holding this for years. She told me they'd been together for almost 2 decades. That he split his time. That they thought he traveled for work. That every other weekend, when my dad had to go to the cabin, he wasn't going fishing. He was being a husband. And a father. To someone else. I went numb for days. Didn't tell my mom. Didn't tell my sister. Just stared at old photo albums like they were lies in hardcover. How many birthdays did he miss with them to be with us? Or was it the other way around? How many business trips were actually barbecues with his other kids? And then the real questions hit. Did my mom know? Did my sister? Was I the only idiot still playing make-believe? I wanted to ask him. God, I needed to ask him. But he was gone, and with him, all the explanations, all the excuses, all the ugly truths I'd never get to hear from his mouth. It wasn't just betrayal. It was identity collapse. Because if he wasn't who I thought he was, then maybe I'm not either. I couldn't keep it in anymore. My mom was making tea like it was any other Thursday. Calm. Normal. And I just blurted it out. Dad had another family. She didn't say what. She didn't gasp. She just froze, holding the kettle mid-pour. After a long pause, she sat down, looked at me, and said, "I always knew there was something. Not everything, but enough." She told me there were trips he never explained, strange phone calls he always took outside, random charges on credit cards he said were work-related. I wanted to ask, she said, but I also didn't want to know. And I finally got it. It wasn't that I was the last one to know. It's that everyone else was afraid to ask. I messaged the woman back, told her I wasn't angry, just confused. She asked if I'd be willing to meet. Said her son, my half-brother, wanted to talk. I didn't know what to expect, but when he walked into the diner, it was like staring at a version of me from another timeline. Same walk, same jawline, same weird way of cracking his knuckles. We didn't say much at first, just sat there, two strangers with the same blood and 100 different childhoods. Finally, he said, he talked about you guys all the time. Said you were his first family, the one that had his heart. I didn't know whether to cry or punch the table. He said our dad tried to do the right thing for everyone. Tried to be 2 men in 2 lives. And in the end, he didn't fully belong in either. Neither of us finished our food. The hardest part wasn't the cheating. It wasn't the secret family. It was grieving someone I no longer recognized. I'd already said goodbye to my dad once, at his funeral, in front of everyone. Now I had to say goodbye again. Not to the man who died, but to the version of him I'd built in my head. I looked back on every fishing trip, every handshake, every quiet "I'm proud of you." And I didn't know what was real anymore. Was he proud of me? Or just proud of how well he kept the act going? I cried. Not because he was gone, but because I missed someone who never really existed. And that kind of grief? It doesn't fade. It just finds a quieter place to hide. I didn't want to tell her. She was always closer to Dad, called him her anchor. But secrets rot from the inside, and I couldn't carry it alone anymore. We met for coffee. I said I needed to tell her something important. When I said the words, "Dad had another family," she laughed. Not because it was funny, because she thought I was kidding. But when she saw my face, everything changed. She didn't ask for proof. She didn't yell. She just stared at the table and said, "So we were the lie." I told her no. I said we weren't the lie. We were one part of a truth he was too weak to live honestly. She didn't cry. Not then. But she hasn't called me since. I stopped looking at old photos. Stopped trying to piece together timelines or compare birthdays. There's a version of this story where I keep digging, hoping for closure, clarity, some final answer. But that version of me doesn't exist anymore. I started going to therapy. At first, I talked about my dad. Then I started talking about myself. Because somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't just mourning him. I was mourning who I thought I was because of him. The man I wanted to be, loyal, honest, grounded, wasn't shaped by his example. It was shaped in spite of it. And maybe that's what finally helped me breathe again. A few months later, I got another message from the woman. She said their kids were struggling, that they'd always known something wasn't quite right, but now they were left with pieces they didn't know how to fit together. She asked if I'd be willing to talk to them. Not as a brother, just as someone who understood. I never replied. Not because I hate them. I don't. They didn't choose this any more than I did. But I knew if I opened that door, I might never close it again. And I needed to choose my own healing over their confusion. That decision still sits heavy, but not as heavy as it used to. It's been almost a year since I found out. The world didn't end, but mine shifted, permanently. I still love my dad, but not blindly. I grieve him, but not the man I imagined. I grieve the man he tried to be and failed. And I've stopped chasing answers. Some people live in fragments. They build separate rooms and hope the walls never fall down. My father lived that way. I won't. If you're reading this and you've ever discovered something that shattered your past, I'll tell you what my therapist told me. You didn't lose your foundation. You just finally saw what it was really made of. And now, you get to choose what comes next.